Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Courageously Authentic Leadership Summit. I am so excited to bring to you Kathleen Hunter. Kathleen finds energy and inspiration in building strategic cross-sector ecosystems for scoping and scaling innovative business solutions with partners across financial and professional services, as well as big tech and startups and international organizations, including UN agencies. So Kathleen kind of covers it all, right? She's got it all going on. As founder and CEO of Diversity Hunter International, she advises and supports leaders to clarify their individual and their organizational purpose and align their broader strategic objectives with ESG metrics. For those of you who are not familiar with ESG, it's environmental, social, and governance, whereby diversity in people across measures of identity and skills capacity remains integral. Now, Kathleen was actually the first in her family to attend university, as I was, so we have a lot in common in that respect. And through the completion of an interdisciplinary doctorate at the University of Oxford, she gained a strong appreciation for communities that blend local and global learning and for experiences that expand our worldview. Now, one thing I love about Kathleen, and there's so many, but her belief that human beings are powerful creators. Anything is possible when we move beyond observation into imagination and then act from a place of inspiration. I love that because it is perfect for the conversations that we are having here at the summit. As you all know, we are talking with multiple leaders and all various capacities about what courageously authentic leadership means for them. Kathleen, I'd love for you to share with the audience, what does courageously authentic leadership mean to you?
Thanks so much, Tina, for that generous introduction. I'm so pleased to be here. For me, I've thought about this question quite a lot, and I feel like courageously authentic leadership is a skill set that is rooted in and guided by values and principles, but that changes over time and looks different based on the context. So one of the guiding principles for me is that language is powerful, that courageous leaders, authentic leaders understand that their words carry a lot of weight and that different people who are working with them or who are impacted by them will sort of absorb the weight of their words more than others. And so to be aware of the impact you have on others, as well as to, I think, have a capacity to tune into your own emotional guidance. There's, of course, a lot of value in analysis, understanding the mind-body connection, but I think emotions are often left out of that conversation to our detriment. I think emotions are our guidance system. We can call it our mood, which is emotions over a greater period of time. An emotional reaction is something that happens more in the short term. But understanding what your feelings and emotions actually mean is a key tool in a toolkit that will help you to make decisions that are really right for you. And I think another key guiding principle is the belief and the knowledge that only we know what is right for us, that we can get advice and guidance from others, and having a broad array of perspectives is very valuable for all decision making, whether it's personal, professional. But I think that at the end of the day, creating that trust in yourself, and that comes from knowing what your feelings mean, because sometimes we receive mixed messages, whether it's from family or from past work experiences. The behavior does not feel loving, but people are saying, I have your best interests at heart, or I love you. And so we have these, combined ideas that are actually contradictory. So to be able to know what those feelings mean, and actually to work from a guiding assumption that we are our most powerful when we're in a state of positive emotion, that there is value in learning. In entrepreneurship circles, I think there's an overemphasis on grit, struggle, and strife to create the kinds of solutions or outcomes that you're looking for. And I think we're not always going to move through life with ease, and there's a lot of value in learning from hardship. However, I think we don't need to dwell there and sort of put more of an emphasis on joy is powerful. And I think that that really is an integral element of courageously authentic leadership, to say that joy is powerful and that ease and flow is powerful as well.
Yeah, there's so much in there, so much goodness in there. And I'd love to unpack some of what you brought up, because I think it warrants going deeper into the conversation. So the whole grit and grime, I gotta, hustle and grind through it, and it's gotta be hard and treacherous, and that's not true. And that actually cuts us off from creativity and opportunities and actually seeing possibilities that are out there. It just literally closes down our neuroscience, right? Our biology is like, blah, nope, not going to see that anymore. So can you go into that a little bit deeper about how that joy and that ease actually does create the flow that moves you forward?
Yeah, those are great questions. I love your sort of jumping off points from that, because I think that there are so many messages in society across all industries, sort of from when we're at a very young age, the sense that the universe does not revolve around you, that getting what you want is not something that should come easy, that there's almost an implication that we are lazy if things are coming easy, instead of looking to, say, fine artists or athletes. They know that when they're in that flow and they're sort of, integrating their mind, body, energy, spiritual connection, that's when they're at their peak performance. And so I didn't come to understand this in sort of a structured or formal way until about 3 years ago, when I discovered meditation and that sense. And obviously, I think everybody has different tools and different toolkits that will help them to be in alignment with their true self, or help them to operate from a place of positive emotion and joy. So by no means am I saying everyone should meditate, but for me, that was the channel that I sort of accessed this. Just like you said, your neuroscience and your brain, sort of what you have access to in terms of your ideas, your emotional capacity, it's limited when we're operating from a place of fear or low emotional, sort of on the low emotional scale rather than the higher aspect of the emotional scale. So I think that knowing what your feelings mean and knowing that it's natural to feel good, that human beings come from a place of pure positive energy. That's our root and our source. So always going back to that idea when you're in a situation that feels uncomfortable. And I think the next step for me is to ask myself, what influence am I under? Am I under the influence of my true self that knows, like that my emotions are my guidance system, or am I under the influence of something external? So an example I do often use with leaders who I advise and guide is, for example, if you just watched a horror movie and you feel like something bad is going to happen, is it because you just watched a horror movie and you're feeling vulnerable, you're feeling suspicious, or is it like a true signal coming from inside? Because when we're in alignment, that sense of discomfort is telling us that something's important to us, something matters to us, but also that we need to view it in a slightly different way. It's not always like run away in the other direction that you're in danger. That's, of course, like different than being in a physical danger situation, but in front of other people or when we're making a personal decision, just the knowledge and belief that when you're operating from a place of positive energy, that the outcomes will be exponentially better and larger. So another example I often use with leaders is, yes, we can push a boulder from one side of the room to another. You can get a result by that struggle and strife, but the results will be much bigger and better and more win-win-wins for other people when you're tapping into other people's pure positive energy as well. Because if you are operating from a place of fear, suspicion, limited beliefs on what's possible. And something I just like to insert into that is that we can't go from a very low emotional space to a very high emotional space immediately. We can think a slightly better thought and we can move ourselves up the emotional scale, but it's not a fair expectation to put on ourselves or other people that you can go from like very low to very high. And so understanding that your thoughts influence your emotions and vice versa. But in terms of like the boulder and the struggle and the strife, I think especially in legacy systems, whether that's government, financial services, legal services, there's sort of a taken for granted assumption that, well, we've been successful up until now. Why do we need to do things differently? And I think the same sort of in the same vein, it's saying, okay, yes, you may have been successful until now, but we can always do better. You can always access more. And so as consciousness evolves, as we have a sort of better understanding of the mind, body, spiritual energy connection is integrated within business and all types of organizations, I think it's going to become much more understood that joy is more powerful than coming from a place of fear and insecurity.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, so when you say, oh, you can do more, some people are like, I'm already freaking tapped out. Like, I don't have any white space on my calendar. I don't have any time for myself. I'm totally frazzled. Like everything is at max capacity right now. And they're in that doing mentality.
Yes.
Right. And so, but what you're talking about and what courageously authentic leadership is, from my perspective as well, is it's about that being. Who are you being while you're doing all this stuff? If you're being someone who is irritated, stressed out, anxious, like, are you enjoying any of that? Because nobody around you is enjoying that, if that's the source that you're coming from. And so what's the point? Right? What's the point of checking all these boxes and knocking off the stuff on your calendar when at the end of the day, you're totally spent, your family's irritated with you, you're isolated? Like, come on, there's more to life than that. So I know you see a lot of leaders who go through this transformation. What advice do you offer, can you offer for folks who are like, there's something more here?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I feel like similar to seeing courageously authentic leadership as a broad kind of skill set with foundations in principles and values, but that looks different based on the context, based on the problem solution that you're focused on. I feel that leading with or sort of guiding my conversations and my advice from a place of meeting people where they are. So asking different questions than someone is used to being asked, getting to the root of what is your belief system. Are you thinking of things? And I mean, this I feel like we are all a product of our society. We are all a product of our culture. We're all a product of our families. And that's not to say that we're robots who can't be critical thinkers or reflexive thinkers. But it's just an acknowledgement there that there are mythologies and false dichotomies that are just they're I think they influence us to different degrees depending on our location, whether it's in the industry that we work in or the society that we grew up in. But I think asking people to be reflexive in their thinking, where do they operate from a place of false dichotomies? Is this like right or wrong? Or can we see that there's always a gray area? And the gray area is the place where more possibility is located. And so for myself, just to sort of circle back to some of my training, my master's degree is in social psychology. And so I sort of went into my time before advising leaders on their personal and organizational beliefs, but really coming from like a change management perspective. How do we infuse diversity, inclusion, equity into the strategic plan? I was operating from the sense like, oh, I have critical thinking skills. I can be reflexive of my own thinking. But now what is so freeing is to say that, number one, the way that our brain is sort of created, it's a focusing mechanism. It's looking for something to focus on, right? And so having that ability to focus on something that you feel is interesting, is engaging, is enjoyable, there's value in that. But also to say that because of the way our brain operates, whether that's mostly by habit or sometimes by habit, that it's not possible to see very far beyond your current perspective. We can always learn more. We can always have, a broader toolbox. We can always have access to new frames of reference. But we're on an eternal journey. We are always learning. And if you take that perspective, it's like you don't ever always have all the tools. You don't have all the answers. And so for someone who feels, okay, like I've been in financial services for 30 years of my career, I'm committed to having more women on boards, I'm committed to equal opportunities and all of these things. There's value in seeing that and hearing their perspective on that. But I think there's always an infinite number of possibilities of how to achieve those things beyond that person's perspective. So asking slightly different questions and just coming from a place of, okay, I want to understand where you are. How do you feel about where your organization is now? How do you feel about like the way that your values, your individual values are actually infused in practice in your organization? And these are often things that leaders don't have time, like you just mentioned, they don't have time, or they haven't had the sort of opportunity to have these conversations. And so really, I always bring it back to the power of language. And I think we have heard much more, especially during and after the pandemic, the value and the power of language and the power of the story that we tell ourselves. But I think until you have somebody else who's outside of your voice, you, myself included, like we don't realize the limiting sort of boxes we set up for ourselves. And so having that different perspective, I feel like is really valuable. And that's really where I think having individuals, whether they're at the C-suite or at the board level or executive directors in government, or whether they're interns or people coming into an organization in a new capacity, there are leadership qualities inside all of us. And so giving people the space, I think, to talk about how their own beliefs and values can translate into achieving the objectives of an organization helps individuals feel like they're not just a cog in the wheel, that they're contributing to something larger. And that once you sort of have a sense of what your beliefs are now, it becomes easier to say, okay, I feel like I've learned all that I could learn in this organization or this position. It's time for me to move on, rather than feeling that sense of guilt of like, well, I should be sort of, I don't know, committed for longer. Or I think it's difficult to filter out other people's expectations of what you should do. So going back to that sense that only I know what's right for me, and that evolution and learning is natural, and there's nothing wrong with the organization. You don't have to be leaving for the wrong reasons, but moving towards something that feels right for you. I think there's a lot of value and power in that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the whole thing about your beliefs, like your beliefs drive what outcomes you get, right? And how your brain is a focusing machine. It's a goal achieving machine, and it will focus on what you tell it to focus on. And I think a lot of people are like, yeah, that's great. But then they still focus on what they don't want.
Yes. Right?
Yes. And that's, I don't want this. Like, and so when we talk about maybe diversity, because that's a big topic with you and what you work with folks on, is I don't want to be the staunchy white guy. I don't want to be disconnected. Guess what you're creating?
Yes.
When you're focusing on what you don't want, that's what your brain looks at. That's what you're telling it to look at. So instead of changing that with your language, right? Talking about language matters. When you say, I want to be open, I want to understand where you're coming from, I want to just hear you and listen. That's the energy you're going to give off. That's what people are going to feel from you. And your brain goes, okay, I'll sit back and listen and be open, because that's what you told it to do.
Yes, absolutely. I love how you sort of wrapped parameters around all of those things, because I think another key aspect of courageously authentic leadership is an ability to say, okay, are you problem focused or solution focused? And being able to switch into that. I mean, I feel like it's habitual in society. Problem, problem, problem. Commercials are problem focused. Most television shows are focused on a problem. And so a courageously authentic leader, I think, is someone who can say, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, because you have to know your audience. Not everybody wants to hear that we need to do things completely differently. There's other ways of, making change, I think, whether it's inside an organization or creating new organizations, but is to say, okay, I'm looking at the problem, whether it's not enough women on boards, because we know that organizations that have gender diversity on their boards outperform at all metrics. So whether it's financial, attraction, retention. So those are important. It's to say I'm looking at the problem, but I'm using the problem as a jumping off point to focus on solutions. And so that's sort of a new way to train your brain, like you said, to look for evidence in the solution department. We can find evidence for any argument, any problem. There's obviously a matter of whether it's good quality evidence or not, but our brain really, confirmation bias is a real thing. We find evidence to support what we believe, whether it's about ourselves or other people. And so to have somebody to come in and say, here's a different framework or set of tools, and we can find evidence for what's working well. We can talk to people in different industries. And that's something I love in my job, is to bring cross-sector partners together, say a law firm, a bank, a business school, a UN agency, who from the outside would not perceive one another as having the same challenges in diversity, inclusion, lack of representation, but really all organizations to different degrees face the same challenges and can really create a lot of resource efficiencies by sharing what's working well, by sharing what is not working well. And that's sort of a tougher one because a lot of entities and also C-suite execs or leaders in other capacities don't necessarily want to create a public message that says we aren't doing very well when it comes to this. We're trying, but we're either directing a lot of resources in this way and it's not going well. But when you bring non-competitive entities together, then there's less of a sense that we should sort of keep quiet about what's not working well. And also it's a trusted environment. And so just like you said, that you can, there's a lot of value in sitting down, I think, with different organizations who realize that we don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to diversity inclusion, whether it's a policy, a program, an initiative. But I think what is necessary is to have a strategic framework over that, and sort of the language and the values of the organization being coherent within a mission statement that is a working, living document to say, this is where we are now. And also, just to sort of wrap up my thoughts on this, I think sitting down with people at all levels of an organization and saying, okay, there are 10 million definitions of diversity out there. There are 10 million definitions of inclusion. They are not all relevant for our purposes. We need to craft a working definition of what these concepts mean for our strategic outcomes, for our business goals, for our people, and track that over time. And so I think that language as an important domain can feel very overwhelming, especially in the diversity inclusion space, because there's a lot of fear of saying the wrong thing, being perceived as not with it in terms of, the relevance of issues in society, whether it's George Floyd, whether it's the Roe v. Wade conversation. But I think that at the end of the day, to say, not everyone in your organization has to be an expert on the history of systemic racism, the history of women's rights, but your organization does have to have that capacity in some respect. Not necessarily every person at the top or every team lead or every person needs to have the same knowledge or awareness about these things, but to have working definitions within the organization about the significance of this for our day-to-day experience, as well as the business outcomes, that I think reduces a lot of pressure on people and makes broader social issues relevant for what's happening inside.
Yeah, and something you brought up about the fear around diversity, inclusion, equity, right? It's I have to do this right, or I'm going to be seen as, like I just said, I don't want to be the staunchy white guy. Okay, most people are not staunchy. Most people are open, right? But there's so much fear around, gosh, I can't be seen as that. I want to be inclusive, but I don't know how, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I'm really conscious. And we keep ourselves in this box. Yeah. And I think that's where the courageously authentic leadership comes in, is the ability to hold space for those conversations and break down those walls and go, I'm not going to do this perfectly because every single person has their idea of what that looks like. And I'm just not going to meet every expectation, but I'm here. I'm open. I want to have the conversation. Let's sit down and see where we connect. And I think with what you said about that was so brilliant about not everything pertains to exactly what your team is doing. Right. And with courageously authentic leadership for us, it starts off with that clarity and awareness of here's who I am, here's my vision, here's what I want to bring to the world. And then it goes into the courage of being able to stand in that space and hold space. And that holding space for you doesn't mean that you're taking space away from anyone else.
Yes, absolutely. And I love how you use the word clarity, because I feel like the joy and clarity is such a powerful state of being. And so giving other people the tools to say, only I know what's right for me. Sometimes I'm going to make decisions where I'm leaning more heavily on someone else's advice, but being able to say clarity versus confusion. I know what that feels like, and not having to make a decision, whether it's a business decision, a personal decision, an awkward conversation you're having with someone. You don't have to make a decision if you're not comfortable with where you are in terms of clarity, and knowing that you can arrive at a place of clarity. And even to have that conversation and to say, I don't have clarity yet. I'm not good with moving forward. Just sort of taking a pause and giving other people that space in that way. I feel like it saves a lot of headaches, whether it's financial, personal, like the interaction level. So yeah, the power in clarity, I feel like, is exponential.
Yes, absolutely. And I think once that clarity is there, and it comes consistently, right? It's not like I got clear today, now I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
life happens, things change,
Yeah.
right? So it's a constant just checking in with yourself and what you're doing and who you're being, and then that courage. And once you feel like, yeah, I can step into this space, you can hold space to connect with other people and build community in this way that we're talking about. And the fourth pillar is communication, which goes to what you were saying about language, being able to communicate that in a way that is true for you, and also allows for someone else to be in their truth without there being this conflict. Like, it doesn't have to be a right and a wrong.
Yes, yes. And especially like if we're talking about diversity of skills and diversity of thought, there's so much good quality research to show that better solutions come from a diverse perspective on how did we arrive at this problem? What's the process to reach a solution? That there's certainly not one way or another. An example that I like to use, especially with scientists, physicists, people, I think, who are maybe more likely to have been trained with a sense that there is a right and wrong, or that laws, and I feel like, okay, yes, the law of gravity, that's consistent.
Yeah, that's not going to change right now that we know of.
Yes, absolutely. But in terms of, there was a time when scientists argued that the earth was flat. Like, we have moved on from that. There's an evolution in science. An example that I find quite funny is after the Wright brothers took their first flight, for how many years do you think the top physics journals published articles claiming that flight was impossible?
Oh, yeah.
Over 12 years after they took their flight. And of course, like, back in the early 20th century, communication was slower. So but still, I think it's like, if you can't see that your paradigm limits your options, and that bringing together other paradigms will expand what is possible and what is efficient, and how to, be creative in different ways, then I think those are the people and those are the organizations who may exist sort of going into the future. They won't be as successful. They won't have as happy of employees. And I think we have a much better understanding of the value of creativity, not just in sort of creative industries, but that we are all creative. We all have a unique set of experiences and perspectives on the world, and that will make, like you said, connecting with people and the results inside an organization be exponentially better.
Yes. And there's actually scientific research, and I will actually post this, I think, in the email when it goes out. So I'm a brain health trainer with Dr. Daniel Amen, and he's done 130,000 brain spec scans. And so he did a scan with a woman who was writing a book about happiness. And she was like, I want to know what's going on in my brain. Like when I'm thinking about happiness, what's happening? So they did a scan, and her brain lit up in this, I won't be all like scientific about it, but her brain lit up in these areas that open up possibilities and seeing options and creativity. And then she said, I wonder what it looks like when I'm not, like if I'm thinking about things that I'm fearful of or that I don't like or that make me feel bad. So she did a meditation for 30 minutes a couple of days later on just the things that she was fearful about. They did the scan again. Those areas in the brain that lit up for creativity and possibilities shut down. But you can see there's no activity there. And so it actually, this is not woo-woo pixie dust, like, oh, you'll feel better. No, it's actually the way that you function as a human being. And so everything that you're saying goes right into the actual, this is how you are as a person. Yeah. And I love that you're sharing everything that you are. Kathleen, thank you so much. We're at time, and I know you and I have talked for hours because we could just talk forever. And I love that you've shared what you have. How can people connect with you if they would like to connect with you further?
Oh, thanks, Tina. It was so fun to talk to you too. I spend most of my time on social media on LinkedIn. So I'm under Diversity Hunter. And also people can reach me, Kathleen at diversityhunter.com. If you'd like to have an email conversation, learn more about our leadership advisory opportunities. We also create what we call strategic pipeline coalition. So that's where we bring together the cross-sector partners to share best practices around diversity and skills, capacity, and people. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to see what we do together going forward, because you were just a beacon of light and it's amazing.
Well, same to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kathleen. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you later.